Welcome to Shareholder Primacy from Free Float Media, a podcast about activist investing, securities law, and all the ways the financial and legal worlds intersect and collide in real life. Ann Lipton and I have returned. Ann is the law professor at University of Colorado who teaches and researches securities and business law. She looks after and is custodian of the legal end of the. I try to think of different.
I understand the question in your voice. Law professor, maybe.
Law professor. No, she's the law part of what we talk about here on the podcast.
And that's Mike Levin, an activist investor who lives and works in Chicago. He covers the financial side of our podcast.
Yes, financial. And financial is as broad as legal. So anyway. Hey, Ann, guess what?
What?
It is 50. This is our 50th podcast.
Wow.
Did you ever think we could get that far? I don't know.
I did not know what was going to happen.
Right. We found enough to talk about it. We have a long list of other things to talk about.
That is
so there will be many more, but this is number 50.
Yes.
Yes, it is. So, awesome. And how can people tell us what to add to the list?
Yes, they can email us. They can email us at shareholderprimacy@freefloat.llc. I'll just mention we got a great, helpful email in response to our last podcast, which we will spin out in a future date and talk about it. But so if you can send us what you would like us to talk about or comments on what we've talked about, that would be helpful. Shareholderprimacy@freefloat.llc.
Thank you. All right. It's been a little while since we talked about or maybe my, at least one of my favorite subjects, universal proxy. Really technical, but very broad implications. So 3 years ago, right around now, the SEC began to require companies to use the universal proxy in contested board elections. So we need to be careful that it only applies to proxy contests.
Mm-hmm.
But so after 3 years, it's probably a good time to look back on our experience and sort of see what we've seen and see what we've learned.
We can cover some of the basics, a refresher of what this actually is, and then you can tell us what's happened in the last 3 years, because I don't know.
I will do my darndest. Let's talk about some of the basics then, just as sort of a refresher, or for people who haven't been quite familiar with it. It sets a good groundwork for understanding some of the trends that we saw, which we'll talk about in a little while.
Yes. So, the way I explain it, is that you have to understand it in contrast to what the world looked like before.
Yes.
So we start with most shareholders do not go to the shareholder meeting. They vote by proxy, meaning they cast a ballot in advance, which is very much like casting a ballot by mail. And they mark off the ballot and they mark off their choices. And when there's a contested election, both the company and the dissident send their own versions of a ballot, and you can pick which one you want to return.
Or you could have. This is the past, right? Okay, go ahead.
The past was you pick which one you'd want to return. And it mattered a lot back in the day because they were different. Because the rule was that you could only put the name of a particular director candidate on a ballot if that director agreed to be included on your ballot. And since in a proxy contest, both sides are rather at odds, nobody would agree to put their names on the other side's ballot. So what that meant was that you as a shareholder would get a copy of the company ballot and you would get a copy of the dissident ballot, and they would lift two different director slates. And that meant that you could only choose from one slate or the other slate, and you would mail that ballot back. There was no way to pick and choose and combine different directors from different slates.
Right. And there was actually an interesting so basically, as an activist, I used to have to get consent from candidates. And I used to have to run around, the night before I submitted a notice. And I'd be getting consents from the people I've been interviewing and talking to and so forth. And they write a short little letter that my lawyers told me to make them sign that said, I hereby consent to agreeing to serve as a director or appear as a director nominee. I can't remember the exact language. Well, and I think what you're saying is that if I tried to get that from any of the company people,
they would say no.
They would decline.
They would say no. So you could only have on your ballot the people who you were nominating. Yes. And the company directors would not be on your ballot. And that would mean that if anyone wanted to vote for your directors, they couldn't also vote for company directors so that they take, a few directors from each slot. Essentially, you'd have to go
Right.
the entire activist slate or the entire company slate with some variations for short slates. But that was basically
Right.
the principle, that you couldn't pick and choose from the different slates unless you actually went to the shareholder meeting for the most part and cast your ballot
Okay, like
individually
in
for one or
person.
the other.
Like show up in person. And
Like
what would
show up
happen?
and actually,
You'd get a
then you
piece
would
of
vote.
paper. Right.
Then
You get a
could
piece of
vote,
paper
like,
listing
all the
everybody.
exactly, but you could, but unless if you were voting by proxy, you would have these ballots that would have either one slate or the other slate. And so
Right.
essentially what the SEC did 3 years ago was to
Right.
say that's stupid, which actually people had been saying for years that's stupid. But finally the SEC made rules that said if it's a bona fide contest, and it has some rules for how it's got to be bona fide, like, because they're
Right.
afraid of like people who aren't really making much solicitations. They have to solicit
Right,
a certain
yeah,
number
yeah.
of people. But if it's a bona fide contest, then everybody gets to list all the candidates on their ballot. You still get a ballot from each side, but the ballots have the same list of candidates, all the
Right.
company candidates and all the activist candidates, as well as other stuff that might be on the ballot, so that you as a shareholder can pick either one to return, and it doesn't affect who you can vote for. You can vote for some of the company people, and you can vote for some of the activist people if you want to mix and match. And
Right.
that's,
So-
yeah.
Yeah.
And one of the
that was the
things we talked
basic
about-
idea.
and
Right.
that's the basic idea. And one of the things that we talked about is a sort of unanticipated side effect of this was the possibility of running proposal-only proxy contests, where an activist doesn't propose any candidates for director, where they only propose a shareholder proposal, because they can put the company director candidates on their own ballot, and then you could return their ballot. So we've talked about that before.
Right. And that was the when the mine workers
And and the
did their
Mine
thing at Warrior Met
Warrior
and some
Met,
others.
and Starboard did it too. Yeah, so like
Right,
there,
and News Corp.
the idea is because they know they can list all the director candidates on their own ballot, they can circulate a ballot that has the company director candidates and say a shareholder proposal,
And their proposals.
which they
Right.
couldn't do before, because before they couldn't list the company directors. They would only
Right.
send around a ballot with shareholder proposals on it, and no one's going to return that because they don't want to sacrifice their ability to vote for directors.
Right.
So
So this it's 3 years ago, but there was a little bit of a history. This was kind of quiet. No, I think there was no one quite saw this coming in 2022. I don't think
people had been urging it for years. I don't know if when they actually finally did it, whether that was a surprise, but people had
Yeah.
been arguing about this for at least 10 years before then.
Right.
And there was a lot of concern that it would, encourage frivolous candidates, that kind of thing.
Right. And then the SEC put in a couple of what they thought would be safeguards
Right.
against
Safeguards.
that, which is the solicitation.
Yeah. So activists have
requirement.
to actually go out and solicit 67% of the voting power and so forth. Like, you have to essentially prove that this is a non-frivolous contest.
Right. And so there's a little bit of question about how do you provide evidence of that solicitation. That's come up in some contests I've been involved in.
Oh, really?
Where
Oh, yeah. Where somebody said you haven't really solicited 67%.
or how do we prove it?
Prove it. I see.
And so companies, I do know this. There was this whole groundswell of bylaw amendments 2 to 3 years ago, whatever,
Yeah, in
where
response.
a lot of companies were allegedly merely conforming their bylaws to this.
Yes.
And it's
they put
14
in a lot of
14
advance notice bylaws
exactly.
where they said
went
it was
and
only because of a universal proxy, but yeah.
Yeah, they snuck in some other stuff. But in particular, and this is important, a number of companies, I do know this, had included in their bylaws this requirement that you need to solicit 67%, but you need to provide evidence of that solicitation like 5 days before the meeting. And so proxy solicitors now, have sort of a standard thing where they're able to provide, lists of all the
Who they
people that they
contacted.
mailed to or whatever.
Well, that's interesting, because does that give the board? I mean, I actually am asking, like, is that something that gives insight into how the campaign is unfolding to the board, or is it not
a
really
little?
that?
Yes, sure.
Or is it not really that important?
It's a little insightful. In these kind of situations, people are they're scrapping for whatever kind of,
for
little
any
bit
kind
of
of information
information and so forth.
I guess
or-
if you are soliciting more than 67%, there's someone you don't want
Right,
it
that's
clear
the
that you
thing.
spoke to, then you
Yeah.
can leave them off the list. and just
Right.
leave
And
that.
so,
Well, we spoke to BlackRock, like shocker.
right, in most situations, at least financial activists solicit as close to 100%
Solicit
as
all
they
of them,
can.
yeah.
They just kind of budget for this,
Right.
and they say, and so and there were a bunch of companies that were looking for this kind of proof, and so activists would provide it. They'd say, proxy servers give all these lists, and so they'd kind of show that. So that was, and importantly, this was a Gary Gensler special at the time. So this was
That's
this
one
was
of the few things that survived.
Yeah, right, exactly. So I think I'm not sure people are kind of worried about it. I wonder
No,
if it's gonna live
haven't heard.
for the next 3 years, but I haven't heard anything that's
I
gonna
haven't heard
change
anything.
it. Yeah, but it's important to kind of I think to point out a couple of kind of important attributes of this. First, it makes the SEC's stated intention here was to make voting by proxy, voting absentee, voting over the internet or whatever, as similar as possible to voting in person.
Yes.
So that was kind of the SEC's goal, and I think that was in the reg when they kind of promulgated. But then there's also an interesting, and this is where I got really, really fascinated by this, interesting little kind of thematic implication, which is it kind of converted board elections from this binary matter where you could vote either or. And again, you could do, get an exception, get a legal proxy and so forth. There's things, but it was an enormous hassle to try to do this so-called mix and match by proxy before this. So everything was binary. You're voting one or the other. And it converted it, as I've described, into a continuous structure.
Okay.
So a shareholder, and this is all for shareholders' benefit.
Right.
A lot of companies kind of pissed and moaned about, this is a problem, and then activists were saying, oh, look what they've done for us. But this is really trying to make it better for shareholders, and I really respect
It gives them
the
as much
SEC
flexibility as possible.
Exactly. And so now shareholders can vote for as much or as little change, at least as expressed in a board election, as they desire.
Right.
So
I think it's there's something you need to fix, but it's not a huge thing. Maybe just one seat.
Yeah.
One
So
chamber.
I'm gonna say one. I only think enough change out of a 10-person board that I only think 2 people need to change. Or man, I am such a big fan of the company, I'm going to vote for all the incumbents. Or I think the company's so screwed up, I'm going to vote for all of the activist nominees, and I wish they nominated more.
Yeah. Right.
So, but you can sort of calibrate your desire for change at a company to your vote, which was never been done before. And I think there's some very interesting implications about how not only how the votes kind of unfold, but how activists plan for these votes and how companies respond to this. So it really starts to have implications for the strategy that we see in proxy contests. And that was kind of interesting to me. I talked to a couple political scientists at one point to try to. That's what led me to
understand how the dynamics. Yeah.
Yes, that's what we had some really good conversations with Sarah Hahn at one point, who studied the parallels between political democracy and financial or corporate democracy. Right. So there's been a lot of study in political science about these kind of voting behaviors when voting systems change like this. And so I was trying to learn a little bit and apply it to our little corner of corporate life. So anyway, so that's some of the basics about how this little. I think people sort of thought it was sort of a technical change, just kind of how you display a bunch of names on a card, whether it's the blue one or the pink one or the green one or the white one, and but there's been some interesting implications for this, like sort of in the data. So I think maybe let's talk about that data, but in a moment after we take a quick break.
Okay, sounds good.
Cool. Sure. Here at Shareholder Primacy.
Shareholder Primacy is brought to you by FreeFlowAnalytics.com, the only free database of corporate directors, their influence, and their performance. If you own a stock or retirement plan, go to freeflowanalytics.com and look up which of your elected directors are performing well and which aren't. Use your vote in the alternative democracy and get your data at freeflowanalytics.com. Now, back to the show.
Welcome back to Shareholder Primacy. I'm Ann Lipton here with Mike Levin, and we are talking about developments at the universal proxy. So what are the developments?
What happened? So
What's
yeah,
happened?
in 3 years of looking at this. So I followed it for, since its inception. And I don't know, I you have your hobbies, which are following really
Delaware opinions.
really weird ass litigation and securities crimes, and probably your cats or something like that. I don't know if cats are a hobby or just all right. And I have a hobby of tracking universal proxy contests. So I've kind of collected data about this, about the ones that went to an actual vote. I was kind of interested in how the change in the ballot affected like voting behavior.
Okay.
So, and by extension, how it affects the strategies and so on and so forth, and costs, all sorts of interesting ways to look at this. And so looking back over 3 years of data, there's some interesting stuff. I think it's worth pointing out what we didn't see. So there was this sense 3 years ago, and ever since then a little bit each year, that there'd be a whole lot of new proxy contests, that this was going to lower costs dramatically. It was going to make it a lot easier. It was going to achieve what the old proxy access movement was trying to achieve, years ago. There was I was one of the people who predicted, oh man, people are going to really jump on this, and that didn't quite happen. There have been an uptick, as we'll see, in contests, and there's more, and better whatever activism happening each year in the past 3 years, but we didn't see a magnitude change in the number of contests. It still was kind of steady with sort of a gradual increase that was commensurate with some other factors. So that's one thing we didn't see. Another thing we didn't see was a whole bunch of the traditional ESG community, those proponents, starting and initiating proxy contests. I personally had thought that a number of the conventional precatory proposal sponsors would use this as a big opportunity to try to send their message
ESG
or whatever.
Contest. But
Yeah.
I think that if anything, we haven't seen a whole lot of it, but maybe they've chosen to use it for the proposals rather than but go on. So yes.
Oh, you mean for the and the 14 stuff?
So because that's what everyone said, that like all the ESG people were going to like run the ESG candidate or something. But apparently no, although maybe they're doing that with proposals instead. We'll
Yes. Yeah. And there was that one famous example of ExxonMobil losing an election to engine number one, which they had their one and done and so forth, and those were ESG proponents.
And that same board sued when another shareholder did the climate change.
So and that was that was pre-universal proxy, and those directors eventually got kind of co-opted and so forth. So there was that kind of suggested to me that there'd be more of this, and there hasn't been. In my looking at all the proxy contests that kind of come up, that get settled, and the ones that go to a vote, there's not a single ESG proponent that that was normally associated with this among that community that went and nominated directors and then took it to its conclusion, which kind of surprised me, because again, a lot of the case at the time was that this was going to lower the cost of running a proxy contest, because an activist would have to solicit only 67%, or maybe not even that. There's different kind of tactics around that. And what it kind of reminded us of was that it reminded us that while you don't have to spend a lot of money to start and to pursue a proxy contest. The SEC in its rulemaking, which was actually kind of interesting reading, all 200-something pages of it, which was a struggle for me. Yeah, right. Double space. Thanks. That, they did a very thorough economic analysis. I think that was in part in response to like
It's
some
required.
lawsuits
Well,
they'd
they're-
seen.
they're-
Yeah, right.
They're also, yeah, I mean, like they have to do a certain kind of analysis, and yeah, courts have said rejected them when they don't.
Right, exactly. So, and they were estimating that you could do a proxy contest for as little as like $4,000 or $5,000, and that's in fact true. But running a
can't
proxy
win.
contest, exactly right.
Like I know people are always asking me, can you sue over it? I mean, can you physically file a complaint? Yes, but can you win? I don't know.
Can you prevail? Different question.
It's a very, very different question. Exactly. So yeah, for a couple $1,000 you can start it, but that doesn't mean you can finish it.
Right. So, so that's what we didn't see. What we did see was a couple of interesting things. First, there are surprisingly few, and I was even surprised by that, proxy contests that go all the way to a vote. So in just this year, and I was going to like play a little game here and say, you know what the number is, but we've seen the same notes.
I have no idea what. Well,
oh, you don't? Oh, you don't?
I
Oh, you didn't read that part of our notes here?
Very few.
17 in 2025. 17 U.S. public company proxy contests went to a voting outcome.
But do we know how many were actually started?
Oh,
17 out of how many?
17 probably out of 80 or 90 or 50.
Okay.
I mean, some high many dozens. Mm-hmm. And a lot, others get withdrawn. They get a lot of settlements, which we'll talk about in a minute. And so 17. So at the start of the universal proxy era, 2023, there were only 12. And then it went up to 15 in 2024 and 17 last year or this past year. So, and again, there's different ways of counting. And someone, I've seen other studies that say it's not 17, it's 22 or it's whatever. But the key thing is it's a very small number.
Okay.
Relative. So it's a very small sample in terms of trying to analyze this. And you can start to look at some really interesting stats here, which I put in a post a while ago. So followers here, if they want it, you can go to the Substack and find it, or I can send it to you. What the universal proxy card seemed to do was make activists a little more aggressive. Okay, so I like to look at the number of board seats that activists were looking for. And you do it as a couple different statistics. So like percentage of the board seats that are available for election, the percentage of the total board, and that number has marched up. So in 71%, against a small sample, of the 17 contests, activists sought, at least nominated candidates for 71%, almost 3/4 of those contests were looking for majority of the candidates. And part of the problem is you have to start looking at classes. So in classified boards, if you're 3 people out of 9, you can nominate all 3, and
but
you still won't get control. But that's still 100% of what's available. So it kind of changes the mindset and voters. So in 75%, activists were looking for 75% of the available seats in 2025.
And that's a change.
That was a definite increase. Usually you'd be going for 1 or 2 or whatever. Just the year before it was 50% of the available seats.
So you think this is a strategy change because since you know that shareholders can mix and match anyway, you may as well throw as many candidates at them as possible.
You may start looking for as many candidates. Exactly.
Because
right. So that was the first thing. And the second is you can look at how successful these were. Okay. And again, in a vote, it gets, and again, this is successful in a vote, not necessarily from a settlement or something like that. We'll talk about that in a minute. But activists in 41% of those 17 contests won at least one of the seats they were looking for, which is up from just 1/4 of those the year before.
Okay.
And 41% of the contest, and as a general statistic, they won about 1/4 of the seats that they were looking for, 1/4 of the board, or 1/4 of the available seats that they were after. So and that kind of gradually went up over the past 2 years. So activists were succeeding a little more again, it's not wildly successful. So, like on average, activists were winning 10% of a board. One seat out of 10, which is about sort of what it's been. Within a range of variability over the past many years.
Okay.
But nonetheless, it seems that the universal proxy started making activists a little more aggressive, if you will, in terms of what they were looking for. Is sort of what they were asking for. And so consequently, the other major trend, and others have observed this, was that a lot of these kinds of settlements are way up here. So this seemed to get the parties, and particularly the companies, which have a lot of resources to throw at this, much more eager to try to settle these contests. And I was looking at some other data that showed that not only were there a lot more settlements, kind of as you were asking earlier, as a percentage of the contests that were started, they were settling a lot faster.
Oh,
so the last couple of years we've looked at this, settlements are taking like half the number of days, measured, arbitrarily from when it started or when it was announced, to wrap up, which was really interesting. So that that suggests that you could, probably if you're an activist, achieve your goals, necessarily, sort of outside of trying to take this to a final vote. Though again, 17 situations went to a vote, and activists were succeeding, a little more than they had before. So that's on the contest side. There were a couple of other interesting kind of things. I like to follow who some of the proxy solicitors are here, and you probably, I don't know how much you think about or follow, or right? I didn't think so.
I'm aware that they exist.
Yeah, right. But you probably don't meet many of them, I guess,
I do not.
or whatever. Right. Well, these are the folks that are in the trenches. Mm-hmm. So they're the ones who are out there calling people and tracking all the paper. It's a thankless job, and it's really. Even though a lot of a contest depends, as we start talking about, on kind of what an activist wants to spend on it. Mm-hmm. After what an activist wants to do, the proxy solicitor really has a significant impact on these contests. The kind of resources they put into it, how they position it, how they call people, how they follow up, the kind of strategizing they do. So they're kind of the unsung heroes, or I suppose villains, if you're looking at it, of proxy contests. And so I know a bunch of people at the different places, and there's some solicitors that kind of tend more toward working at activists. InvestorCom is one. Another biggie is Okapi, and then Saratoga is the third. And so I've kind of looked at who's done better or worse. Go ahead.
They segment. I mean, I'm curious. It sounds to me it's like they segment the market. Like these are the ones who work on activist behalf, and these are the ones who work on company.
Yeah, they're not going to like to hear that.
Yeah,
because
but is that true?
Yeah. Well, the three that I mentioned tend to work better. They try to sympathize a little more. They understand a little more about kind of how activists think about this stuff.
Okay.
And so they are more the go-to if you're a fund and you're trying to do something like this. Conversely, there's other solicitors that specialize and work for companies.
Well, I know there's industry, right?
Yeah, industry is the biggie. They were with Disney last year. They were kind of quieter this year. Sodali is another one. They're a little specialist that seem to actually be on the winning side of some of these. So there's a whole list of these in some of the posts about who's who. But that's another interesting artifact of this, is that in a universal proxy world, who the proxy solicitor is and how they work, how they help shareholders pick from among the slate, from among the available candidates, and how they kind of guide shareholders to voting becomes much more important now. Okay. It's a little easier for proxies to get thrown out if they're overvoted or voted in wrong ways. So the proxy solicitor becomes pretty important here. The final thing I wanted to mention is what this stuff is starting to cost. which is really interesting. So in the 17 that I in my little hobby that I kind of tracked, the average cost was like between $8 and $9 million combined just to run a proxy contest. So companies spent an average across 17. Go ahead.
No, it's $1 million here, $1 million there. So
Yeah, it's a lot of money. Right, exactly. Well, and so companies, their average was about 5.3 million, and the activists spent an average of 3.2 million on proxy contests. So that's where I get my sum. And of course, activists like to say that activists are spending their own money on this, and companies are spending our own money, their shareholder money.
Right.
Except when we get reimbursed in a settlement, which sometimes can happen, which we won't turn down. The biggest two, which were kind of almost tied, was Air Products and Mantle Ridge combined spent $34 million on their proxy contest, and that's the one where Mantle Ridge won 3 out of 4 of the seats it was looking for. Go ahead.
On Air Products?
Air Products, Mantle Ridge, yeah.
Oh, no, I mean, honestly, I hadn't heard of it. And the reason I just think it's funny is because Air Products, Air Gas is sort of this major conflagration that's in every casebook.
Yes, correct. So, yeah, they've had their experiences here. And then the other one, which got a lot of attention, was when Elliott Management ran its proxy contest at Phillips 66 at PSX. And that was only $33 million. So just behind Air Products and Mantle Ridge. And Elliott also, money talks. Elliott won 2 out of 4 seats that ran there. And there was one contest that was a mere $210,000, and another one that was only $400,000. But most contests have started to increase in cost, where sometimes the activists. There's a few where the activists spent more than the company. That was usually kind of unheard of. Usually companies kind of outspend.
Yeah, because it's shareholder. The directors are not using their money.
Exactly. So I think we've started to see, and there's other scholars that have analyzed this a little better than I have here, that costs are starting to kind of ramp up. And I think it's in part because, activists or funds, whatever, are starting to see the value of, being able to kind of prevail given what universal proxy started to allow. So if they spend, budget for this in the right way, they may have a much better chance of succeeding, or at least getting to the table and getting a settlement that would be, very favorable to the shareholders. So.
No, I mean, the reason that's just interesting is because everyone was assuming, lower costs given just internet distribution, like leaving aside universal proxy, like just internet distribution. You can put advertising, but that's got to be cheaper.
Right. Yeah. Social media. There was all this was talked about over the years. Maybe social media is going to allow these. And there was one proxy contest at the beginning. I think we talked about it on the show. An activist or a shareholder named Dan Manglis, his day job, I guess, is a car dealer in Green Bay. He ran a proxy contest at a place called Zevra Pharma 3 years ago, and used like social media aggressively and so forth. Really did it kind of well, and won both seats out of a class he was looking for, out of 6-person board, and spent I think a couple $100,000.
Wow.
And really succeeded. And again, used some of the communications tools that are available pretty aggressively. But, on the other hand, you look at, Elliott at Phillips, or, last year Disney was the biggie when Trian and Disney together spent like $80 or $90 million. I mean, so you could really
three-way contest there.
It was right.
There were videos which are great for the classroom.
Yes, exactly. Oh, you've showed those? You've did? Oh, cool.
Of course, they used like Disney cartoon characters. Of course.
Oh, wow! I didn't realize that's in the syllabus now.
No, I'm definitely not the only one. I mean, they explain how to vote your shares. It's a perfect.
Oh, that's great! Oh, wow! You should write Disney IR and tell them how much you appreciate it. Anyway, that's kind of the update that I had in mind, or we had in mind, when we were talking about what's going on with universal proxy.
Okay.
So we're starting to embark on a new term, a new, as we say, proxy season. So we'll sort of see how it goes. But I would expect more of the same. People to spend more on this stuff. Similarly, modest, whatever you call it, 20 contests. I don't know. I'm not going to make a prediction. That go to a vote. But, already we've seen like a whole bunch of new activist situations getting announced. Mm-hmm. And if trends follow, a lot of these are going to get settled pretty quickly. No one wants to, go through what's being what some of these others have seen. So, all right, I think I'm out of breath. I think we can close this one out and then revisit Universe of Proxy sometime in the spring after we've sort of see what's unfolded. So let's wrap up. Okay. This is Shareholder Primacy, hosted by Ann Lipton and me, Mike Levin. I'm an independent activist investor and advisor to investors about their activist situations. Ann is professor of law and Lawrence W. Demuth Chair of Business Law at the University of Colorado Law School. You can find me, Mike, at theactivistinvestor.com and Ann at law.colorado.edu. Our podcast is produced and distributed by Free Float Media. Thanks for listening. We will talk again soon.